I talk about a system of insights and practices. And I was thinking, like, well, what are the ones that I particularly draw on? What do I find helpful? And I think of seven particular sources that have been important to me that I bring in. But also, you'll have your own other sources as well. You don't need to be limited to these. But when I offer trainings in the journey approach to change, these are seven sources that I draw on particularly. And I also want to introduce a phrase here, the phrase do the Jatch. The Jatch is the journey approach to change. And so when you do the Jatch, it's not just about knowing about change, it's also engaging in the do step part of the dream cycle. So when you do the Jatch, you take a step in the journey of change that's important to you. But what we're looking at here is not just supporting the change you want to make, but also supporting your ability to make it. And that's where these seven sources are particularly helpful. And I want to start with just looking a bit at motivational interviewing. I learned about motivational interviewing. I first learned about it over 30 years ago, and when I was working in mental health, and it became really the main way that I found helpful with working with people in my work in the addictions field, working with people with severe alcohol dependence. And one of the ideas of motivational interviewing is that you have a conversation where you are really interested in what's important for the person in a way that you help them describe it. So if I was to ask you a question like, what's the change that you'd most love to happen in 2023? That's, in a way, I'm doing motivational interviewing with you. I'm asking you, I'm interviewing you, where I'm kind of drawing out from you expressions of what's important to you, the changes that you'd like to make. And when you have an expression, any kind of verbal expression or writing expression, when you have some kind of communication, some kind of talk that is in favor of a change, or talks about why that change is important, or how you're going to do it, the steps you're going to take, that's known as change talk. And the research by psycholinguists has shown that when you have a conversation that draws out change talk, you increase the chances of that person making the change. It's an evidence-based intervention. But you can also do this to yourself. You can do it to yourself, or if you have support partnerships or support groups, you can do it with each other. And one of the things that we look at in the journey approach to change is how do we teach ourselves to draw out change talk from ourselves. And just some very simple ways we can look at right now is, if you've got a response to a change I'd love to help happen is, and you might even just write that down and come back to that, come back to that a number of times. A change I'd love to help happen is. And then if I was to motivationally interview you, or you were to motivationally interview yourself, you'd ask the question, why is this change important to you? And you start to describe your reasons. And when you describe your reasons, you feed your motivation, you nourish your determination. And then if you kind of move from the why to also the how, and the what are the steps you can take? But also, and you might even ask a bit more, what are the steps you can take, and how will you make them? When will you begin? And the more specific you are about drawing out what you're going to do and when you're going to do it, and also any triggers that might support you to do that, you make that change more likely to happen. But also there's something here about asking yourself what you're committed to. So if I was to ask you now, when you kind of think a change I'd love to help happen is, and I was to ask you, well, what can you commit to here? Is this a change that you can commit to taking on the project of supporting? So you kind of look at the change, you say, yeah, a change I'd love to help happen is, I've got some that have come up for me, and one in particular. And then the journey approach to change involves taking on the project of supporting and helping that change happen. Can you commit to that? What I mean by commitment is you're moving from maybe to yes, I will. You're crossing a line. There's a decision threshold where you cross a line and say, yes, I will. I'm up for this. I'm going to stand up for this. And you actually strengthen your commitment by having it witnessed by others. So if any of you want to, you feel welcome just to write in the chat window if there's any statements of commitment that you want to make. And this is something you can do throughout the year. You can say, when have I had a visible expression of my commitment? And if I were to make one right now, who would I make it in front of? Who would I make it to? And how would I make that? So what are you committing to? And at this stage, what I'm inviting you is just to commit to the idea of taking on the project of helping the change happen that you'd like to see occur. That's what you're committing to. So there's a kind of first what, but then how. So if we look, one of the other things I mentioned is positive psychology. And I particularly find helpful the idea of the growth mindset, and where the growth mindset and the work of Carol Dweck and others is particularly helpful is when we hit roadblocks. And here is a picture of a roadblock, something in the way, something blocking your way. And this idea of a picture, sometimes there can be a way of looking at reality as though it's fixed a particular way, like a picture hanging on the wall. And people might even say things like, the idea of me doing that is just not in the picture. It's never going to happen. Can't see that happening. It's just not in the picture. And one of the big shifts in the journey approach to change is to move from seeing reality as a fixed picture to seeing it more like a roll of movie film, where each moment is like a frame. And just because something isn't in the frame at a particular point of time doesn't mean that it will always be like that. So, for example, after failed attempts at something, it's very easy to end up in what I think of as the stage of disbelief, where you think there's no way this can work. And it's possible that that's the way things are, that there's no way this can work. But there's lots of things that have worked now or do work now that there was a time when people said there's no way this can happen. And you might reflect on whether that's ever happened for you. Are there things that you can do now that there was a time where you said there's no way that can work, there's no way that can happen? Because if you've got any situations like that, they're very valuable reference points that help you counter the kind of feeling of this can't happen. I want to acknowledge here, what I'm acknowledging is the idea of turning points where something can seem impossible at one point in time, but can become possible at another. And what really helps turning points happen is this idea of the growth mindset, this idea that our capacity is not set and fixed a particular way, and we can apply this particularly to our change-making skills. And what would it be like to apply a growth mindset to change-making skills, that we kind of think, okay, well, I can see myself being able to make this kind of change and that kind of change, but not that kind of change there. But what if you were to grow in your skillfulness at making changes, whether in your own life, supporting others, or in the larger, bigger picture that we're all part of? And one of the things that really makes a difference here is not being put off by repeated failure. And this is where this phrase, the journey approach to change, is so helpful. If you fail a number of times, you think, okay, I'm on a larger journey. But there is a skill to failing better, a learnable skill that you can fail in a more skillful way, in a way that you're not put off, or that you learn from that, in a way that you this is something that adds to, that strengthens your ability to move forward. And so we're going to be looking at what helps that happen. Sometimes you need to fail a number of ways before you get a deeper understanding of what you face, and that you can then design in some kind of pathway that is over or through or beyond, not blocked by the obstacle in front of you. And this is what we're looking at when we talk about developing our change-making capacity. How do we grow our capacity to deal with obstacles in the way? Now, we're going to be ending soon, but I just wanted to end on one short practice that some of you might have done with me before. This is an evidence-based intervention, and it's based on the idea that you can look at your hopes, but you can also look from your hopes. What I mean by looking from your hopes is if you were to imagine yourselves just at the start of 2024, looking back at a year that's worked out as well as you'd hoped it could, perhaps even better, perhaps it surprised you, that it's better than expected year. And if you were looking back and some of the things that you'd hoped for at the beginning of year, just imagine that they have happened. What is it you hope for from this year? Imagine that there's some changes have happened or very significant progress has been made towards them. And then we're going to be looking at a process called imaginary hindsight, where first you focus on the goal that you'd like to achieve, the change you'd like to make. And then you pretend or imagine that for a moment that you've succeeded, and you picture yourself in that imaginary future where it's worked out the way you wanted it to. So in this example, I'm inviting you to think of the year 2024, just beginning of that year, looking back. And then I'm going to invite you to write a very brief note to yourself. And that note has three things. First of all, it's your name. So it's addressed to you. So my one is Dear Chris. And then you're looking back from things having worked out well. And you're pleased about that. And you just say, what are you pleased about? I'm delighted that. What is it that you're delighted about? But then also looking at what you did to help that happen. What you did in 2023 to help that happen. I'm just going to suggest we just give ourselves a minute right now, just 1 minute, to try this out. This is the short form, but even if you just write down what the different parts are and you give it more time afterwards, what would you love to happen this year? And if that did happen, what would you like about that? I'm delighted that. Then from that imaginary future, consider what you did to help that happen. Choices you made, actions you took. What did you do? Just giving yourself a bit of time. And this is something that you can come back to. But it's also a practice that you can build into your life. It might be something you do once a week, once a month, once every few months. Looking forward at what you'd like to happen. Imagining that it has happened. Saying, what's the best that could happen here? And imagine that it has worked out that way. Reflecting on what you like about that, what delights you about that, but also what you did to help it happen. Now, obviously, this is an imagination, it's a fiction, but it can also then inform us here in the present, where we come back. We're going to invite you to bring your attention back to whatever time it is for you right now. The point in time, if you're listening to the recording or if you're on the live webinar, it's the 4th of January in 2023. And I'm wondering how that was. This is one of the tools of the journey approach to change. It's a toolkit, it's a system of insights and practices. But the key here is that you're not only supporting the change you want to make, you're taking on the project of helping that change happen. You're also taking on the project of strengthening your ability to do that and maintaining your ability to do that too. that this is part of the journey approach to change. And it's something that we can train ourselves in, that there's a body of knowledge, there's a range of learnable skills, there's a toolkit that we can develop, and also that you already have. I'm sure if you're coming to this webinar, this is something that you're probably deeply fascinated by, that you've already developed your own range of sources that you draw upon. But there's also something that we can look at together. So I want to we're going to take a pause. We'll have time to pick up any questions and comments. But just before we do, I want to say this is a taster. This is a taster of a larger training journey that I'm offering. And the Journey Approach to Change course has 8 webinars weekly, beginning on the 18th of January. But then there's a 2-month practice period. And then there's a 9th webinar on the 3rd of May, where we can come back and say, well, how do we get on? How this idea of really developing a reflective practice around change making. And you can apply this at the level of me, or it might be you're supporting other people at the level of you, or that you're wanting to support larger, bigger picture changes in our world, whether that's in your local community, in an organization that you're part of, a group you belong to, or more broadly in our world. But the important thing here is that lovely phrase, heartfelt intentionality. How do you nourish, develop, strengthen heartfelt intentionality? And what this does is it changes our experience of life. That if you're living a life that you see as a going nowhere story, where your important desires are blocked and thwarted, and you kind of think, what's the point? Your energy can close down. But what we're looking at with the Journey Approach to Change is what I think of as a going somewhere story. That you think about the changes that are deeply important to you, that are your deeply heartfelt intentionality, what you really stand for and would love to put yourself behind and move forward. But then also looking at a set of skills that help that happen, but as well as the learning journey. There's also something about building a community of shared practice, a community of shared interests. And that's why I like doing webinar-based courses where a group of people engage in it together, because meeting weekly, we can act as accountability support. We can also act as encouraging support, where each week, if you set yourself a kind of a step, say, okay, how am I going to do the Jatch this week? How am I going to do the Journey Approach this week? By taking a step that will help move my journey forward. By itself, it might not be a big step, but you know that its many squares form the larger circle. Its many small steps form the larger journeys of change that we feel more satisfied by. There's details about this course at my website, collegeofwellbeing.com, but we've just got a little time left, and I'm just wondering whether there's any questions that have come up in the chat window. Madeline, if any questions that you'd like to feed in, or comments from people, or any questions you'd like to ask yourself?
So there's not questions that have come in, but there's been some wonderful comments, and one was about how the skill to failing better reminds of an exercise in martial arts where you learn how to fall without hurting yourself.
I love that. Thank you, Mirna. The falling without hurting yourself, and sometimes, there is a hurt in falling, but we can maybe without hurting ourselves as much as we might otherwise do. And if we can hurt without falling, that's an ideal. But if we can, sometimes we can't do that, but we look, what are the changes we can make? What are the choice points are available? And actually, sometimes we can not only fall without hurting ourselves, we can fall in ways that help us grow. And one of the best examples of that is learning to walk. I don't know how many of you can remember back to your toddler years. I can't, actually. It's beyond my memory. But there was a time where I just fell. I fell like loads of times every day. But I got back up again. And that's why a big important part of the Journey Approach to Change is bounce ability. Our ability to pick ourselves up, to bounce back, forward, sideways, inwards and outwards. Lots of different ways that we can bounce, but our ability to bounce from the difficulties is a key part of the journey approach to change. Anything else, Madeline?
Well, I was wondering myself, because I know you did say earlier that it was okay not to be clear about what it was that we wanted to change, but I just wanted to check, like, if I turned up at the first session and I really wasn't sure yet what it was I wanted to focus on, like, how would that be?
So here's a question: is if you don't have a focus yet, would you like one?
Yes.
And if you would, then that becomes your journey. Okay, I'm on a journey to finding clearer focus. And it might be that that takes you the whole journey. You do 8 webinars and then have a practice period. And on the 9th webinar, we say, how did you get on? Have you found any progress in developing a clearer sense of focus? And it might be after 9 webinars, you say, no, I haven't, but I've learned a lot that I think will help me in the future. And that's a good goal. That's maybe like the idea of failing better. But also, we're holding the question, I love this phrase, active hope. What is it I hope for? And how can I be active in helping that happen, standing behind it? And so one of the areas we look at and can keep looking at is what helps you find clearer focus, but also it's something you have to keep coming back to, because you can have your focus in January and it can be out of date by June. You need to keep revisiting it and say, is that still current for me? Is that something I still deeply want to do? Is it still my heartfelt intentionality to follow this particular thing? And sometimes there's a bit of a windy road. I find myself dabbling between this and that and doing this for a while and that for a while. But it's only later I can sometimes see how those different activities that I thought was wobbling all over the place actually acted together as a larger whole that have helped get me where I am now. There's a question of, well, what if looking is difficult? Are there other ways? And what I would do is we're looking here at what I call projective techniques. Projective techniques is where you have a kind of a blankness and you project out onto something, onto that something that you can see. And so if you imagine a projector screen, what would I see on that? What if I close my eyes and imagine myself looking at a projector screen or a television or whatever? What would I imagine seeing? Some people find that helpful and easy, and other people, it says they might have the experience of just seeing fogginess and then say, well, what other channels are there? Sometimes it's having a conversation. You hear yourself say what actually you recognize as true for you. It's like, oh, I didn't realize that until I heard myself say it. And so that's why having some kind of process where there's conversation partners in the course, for example, we'll have some time for breakout rooms where we talk with each other. But also if you can find people who support your own journey of change. And the idea would be that we set up JATCH groups, set up group circles in support of the journey approach to change, where we help each other do this. This is a capacity that we need to develop collectively. So I'm also aware of time, and I might fail better at my desire for, I'm not always very punctual, but I'd like to be. And that's a journey that I'd like to take a step forward in. And the way to take that step forward is to recognize that we've reached our time. But also there's a power in constraint. There's a power in saying, I'm only going to give it this amount of time and I'll see what I can do. I'll see what I can do. If I was to show up regularly and give it this amount of time, I wonder what ground I'll cover if I do that regularly throughout the year. That's the invitation to you. If any of you would like to do the more in-depth journey approach to change training and support group coaching experience group, then just look at my website, collegeofwellbeing.com. It'd be great to see you if you come, and there's an early booking discount if you book by the 11th of January. let's leave it there for now. Do email me if you've got other questions. I look forward to working with any of you who come along.